NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States. And in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from The Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer. We're going to start today's podcast off with a quick public service announcement that does not have to do with soccer. Stop posting your bad Damian Lillard trade ideas on Twitter because it's starting to get to the man himself. And now Damian Lillard is tweeting shrugged shoulder emojis about, hey, maybe if they trade me, if that's what the fans want and stuff like that. And you're just giving fodder for people like Stephen A. Smith to just make outlandish statements on television. That's your PSA to start this podcast that's supposed to be about soccer. Please stop with the bad trades.
I feel like this is in Blazers fan Twitter. This is just like, I don't know. It's not an annual tradition, but it's like every 3-year tradition where people will be like, from somewhere there will be some discussion of Dame being traded. Dame will make a few cryptic, like kind of unclear tweets about it. Everybody will freak out about that, and it'll just be its own like sort of self-perpetuating discussion. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But it's all fairly silly until something does. But very interesting point for the Blazers franchise. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
some real decisions to be made over there on that can all be discussed on the Basketball Made in Portland podcast.
Yes, yeah, that's what the Oregonians one is. No, it's it's over there with Aaron and Craig Burnback. They will discuss plenty of Blazers coming up, as will Bill Oram, the man who was in the room for the lottery but had his technology taken away,
which must have just absolutely crushed Bill, right?
I know,
because the number of ping pong ball puns that he had been working on, like I imagine over the course of months since it was clear the Blazers would be in the lottery and that he would be the guy in the room, like he's probably got like a legal pad full of ping pong ball puns and he could use none of them, not a single one.
Yeah, not one was able to be used. At least, the ones he hadn't memorized. But
that's right.
Shifting gears here to the soccer, there is plenty to talk about on that side. Beginning obviously with the Portland Timbers, a really strong week. I think they heard the motivational speech from Chris Reifer and decided to get on their horse and figure it out.
That's the kind of week they need to have, and they need to finish it off. They sort of have a rubber match now. With this week coming up against Minnesota, but the performance against Vancouver is the kind of performance we need to see consistently.
Yeah, 3-1 they won that game, and it was I believe really their most comprehensive performance of the season. A strong victory against a team they should have gotten those 3 points against. Really productive and creative on the attack. Plays from individuals like Juan Mosquera and Santiago Moreno, and of course, Evander, who won Player of the Week with his brace, nearly a hat trick.
Don't say it
for Evander.
Don't say it.
The Redeemer.
Don't say it.
The nickname, which is the bane of Chris Reifer's
the premature nickname. That's what you are.
Yes, I will take responsibility for maybe being a little premature on pushing this a bit, asking him about it, and now it's to the point where it was briefly discussed on last night's broadcast. But as Chris Reifer pointed out, it was on Apple TV, so
yeah, like the
nobody
additional
saw it.
audience for that was like 4 people. Because everybody else watching it had already seen that you were on this warpath, this misguided and premature warpath. And so that expanded your audience by a probably single handful of individuals.
Exactly. And all that aside, really, like for Evander, it's been a breakthrough. Like he has, in the last 3 matches for the Timbers prior to the last night's 0-0 draw with Real Salt Lake, he had 5 goal contributions. He was,
it's good,
consistent and excellent in terms of his playmaking ability last night, despite the 0-0 draw. I think that he was in all the right places. It was just a matter of
all the right places couldn't quite find the right ball.
Or even the right person. Yeah. Sometimes, it was the bounce of the ball and the fact that a lot of the legs were very tired last night that led to that performance. But, getting back obviously to the previous match against Vancouver, that's as good as this team has looked this year. And with the exception of what was a strong attempt by Zach McGraw to make a flying clearance that led to the own goal, I mean, they could have had a 3-0 shutout and been far and away in every aspect the best team on the field.
Yeah, so Vancouver had a couple other chances, but I thought it was a relatively drama-free 3-1. And I think the scoreline reflected the game as a whole. I think Vanni Sartini basically said that after the game too. I think he opened his comments by saying something like, we deserve to lose today, which is correct. The Timbers were just the better team against Vancouver, and that is the kind of performance that needs to become repeatable for them. And I mean, that's not to say that they were poor in Salt Lake midweek, but I mean, that just given where they are on the table, given their points per game still hovering around 1.2, and where they need to be at the end of the season, we're starting to approach the midway point. We're going to be at the midway point here in a few weeks. They need to start racking up points, which means they need to have a lot more performances like they did against Vancouver than like they did against Austin the week before. And that is the task before them now. And that's what they've got to show on 2 days rest now, on Saturday against Minnesota, that they, even with tired legs at home, can have a performance that can get them 3 points and preferably another drama-free 3 points against a team that's right around them in the table. So, that's the task. That's where they're at, and that's going to be what's going to determine whether they can be sufficiently afloat by the time the summer transfer window comes to reinforce the team and have it pay off at the end of the year.
Yeah, and not to put aside the fact that Frank Boley scored his first goal since his debut in that 3-1 win. Good for him. Fastest goal of the season in MLS so far, like 1 minute and 20 seconds or something in that range. And good for him to get in the score sheet, honestly, because the striker position, as we have talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, has been pretty grim all season. One potential light of positivity in that realm was that goal, but also off the field, Yaroslav Nishkota's wife has been pregnant for a while. He missed the game due to personal reasons yesterday on Wednesday against Real Salt Lake. We don't know officially that it's another Babies Made in Portland segment here for the Timbers, but we could be on the precipice of yet another little one. So if that's the case, congratulations to Yaroslav Nishkota and family on the new addition. But on the field, Boley has established himself as the guy at that position going forward, but has yet to quite break through as a consistent threat to score. I think that there have been visible signs of his connection with Evander continually improving, and those two being a really strong combination. Evander obviously has carried the load for this team for the last few weeks, and started to live up to the hype for him. So that those two players, I think, are a lot of what makes this team go lately. It's, I'm sure, frustrating not only for fans, but for Santi Moreno himself to see the way that Moreno has struggled a bit lately, and throughout this season. He has, I believe, 5 assists this year, but hasn't scored a goal. And he's a guy that people thought was poised to have a breakout season. But the Timbers are healthy. With the exception of Eric Williamson being, with the exception of Eric Williamson being,
of their best striker and their one of their best attacking midfielders. Yeah, they're healthy.
Right. Like by their standards, they are healthy. So that's a good sign. They've been, 2 consecutive matches with their full strength 11, which has yet to happen before now this year. At least their full strength of what's left 11. And, I'm wondering your thoughts actually on that decision, the choice to go full strength again at the midweek, with the now necessity probably to rotate a bit on Saturday against a better Minnesota team. I mean, was the gamble worth it for a 0-0 draw? I mean, I'm not 100% sure on that front.
We'll see how much rotation they do coming up on Saturday. It wouldn't shock me if we only see a couple of guys rotated out. I think that is the corner the Timbers have painted themselves into. I mean, I think that's just the reality. Like they can't afford to rotate in games like that. They can't afford to, punt or semi-punt midweek games because they've put themselves behind the 8 ball and they need points. And this is the softest stretch of the schedule, probably until the very end of the season when, unless things improve, it will be too late. And they need points in this stretch because points are just going to be harder to come by as the schedule gets more complicated come June. And then we have the weird Leagues Cup break, which is weird. And I still don't know what to do with. And then August, it's going to be more difficult to go on a run and to rack up some points then. Not to say they can't do it, but it's just going to be harder. And so this is a strike while the iron's hot moment for the Timbers. And I think they are just in a position where they had to go for it. I think they obviously would have preferred 3 points out of this game. They clearly were going for sort of shooting the moon this week and trying to rack up 9 points. All 3 are winnable games. But, I mean, a road draw is basically always some variant of good. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's a relief. Sometimes it feels like a triumph. But you're never coming off a road draw and saying we didn't do what we needed to do. So I think it's kind of just reflective of where they are. I thought maybe Noel Caliscan was going to start for Christian Paredes, but it's a good thing he didn't because Paredes was the Timbers' best player against Salt Lake. He won something like 12 duels. It was like he won something like 70% of the duels he was in. That was best of any player on the field. And I mean, if you're looking for a reason the Timbers kept a clean sheet, there you have it. I mean, Christian Paredes is not a guy who's been known as a defensive-oriented central midfielder, and he is developing into that. And I think we saw that against Salt Lake. He was phenomenal on the defensive side of things, and was a big part of the reason that they got even a point out of that game. Now, that is his 3rd start in 7-8 days. Will he have a 4th start in 11 days in him? I'm concerned about that, especially given his history of hamstring injuries. He had a big one last year and a big one this year. And so, that certainly causes me some concern. But if that is a concern for him, or if he was feeling heavy legs, he certainly didn't show it. Some other guys showed it. Jimmy Chara was out of gas by the time he came out of the game. That sub probably should have come 10 minutes earlier. In bringing Espria in for Jimmy. That's not a surprise. I mean, that's a short turnaround for a guy who isn't fully fit yet because he missed a big chunk of the early season. But I think to answer your question and to go back to that original point, I don't think Gio Savarese had a huge choice. I mean, maybe there were a couple moves that he could have made here and there, but he needed to put a competitive team on the field in this game. He needs to put a competitive team on the field in every single MLS game for the rest of the year. And the reason that is because a lot of the points that would have given them some wiggle room to be able to rotate a little bit, they frittered away in March and April. And that's another good reason not to punt on March and April.
Right. Yeah,
We keep
and
coming back to that, but that's it. That's a good reason not to do that. But they do it every year, so here we are.
I would slightly push back and say there obviously was some punting involved in that first stretch, but we do, it sounds like an excuse from their side, but we do have to acknowledge the level of injuries that
every year. Every year we have to acknowledge the level of injuries. I mean,
but it's more than normal. Like it was definitely more than normal. They were starting guys that haven't seen the field in weeks since the regular guys got back. So
we've seen a lot of those kinds of games in the past several years too. It truly is an annual refrain now, and it happens a lot early in the season. And when that's the case, at some point you can't claim to be victim of it.
Right, and investment in depth can alleviate those issues when those type of issues come up, right? So it's definitely a lot on them, but I think they do have some grace in regards to how the injuries impacted the first part of the season. Either way, that portion is gone. That portion is in the past, and what they can control is now what is in front of them with a team that is a true, top to bottom first team with starting level players at every position, right? So this stretch is crucial. This stretch, I think that they had a real shot at 3 points last night, but I don't think anybody's terribly upset coming out with one from a match that was genuinely ugly. It was like, as you pointed out, like,
really terrible second half.
Classic midweek MLS BS. That's just so exhausting to watch. It was already late. I didn't, it was like an 8:00 something kickoff Pacific time. I was already up way later than I normally am for a road game. I was just like, it was a slog watching that. And I can't imagine what it was like for the players who had to play in it and the coaches who were on the sideline. You could even tell in the post game Zooms, they were just like, oh God, get me out of here. Like, fly me home. Like it was exhausting. So I don't begrudge them at all for not being able to achieve 3 points out of that. I think it would have been huge to go through all that crap and still end up with like a 3 points on the road and come home to get 3 more. But Minnesota is a team that you've got to beat at your place. Like, you've got to put together, even with a slightly more mixed lineup, just as strong of a performance as you did against Vancouver. Get a convincing win and show people that, hey, this turnaround is real. We did not turn a corner into a brick wall, as Chris Reifer said. We turned a corner into a brick wall, and then we like Superman punched through that wall.
Or at least then we reversed and turned another corner into not a brick wall.
Yeah, and into maybe like a foam wall. But yeah, this as you said is an important stretch for them, and I think that the signs of a turnaround are there. The question is, can they secure these results to make up for some of the early season mistakes, the early season struggles, and the early season injuries that led to where they're at right now? They're in 6th in the Western Conference, 3 points out of being out of the picture, but 3 points out of being tied for 4th with, I believe, Dallas. And so it's a tight table. It's competitive in the West. It's pretty wide open, with the exception at the top of LAFC and Seattle being the kind of 2 upper tier teams. Now, Seattle has made a pretty ugly habit of losing games to teams that are on losing streaks lately, including Sporting Kansas City. And I believe it was Austin that had not won in a long time, and they ended up winning last night in Seattle. So Timbers fans are happy to hear that. But either way, they're in a table that's very competitive, and
the table is competitive
either way.
But I think at this point of the season, you sort of need to look at the pace rather than the place in the table, right? Because of where they are in the season, games in hand and games played ends up affecting things. You're right that they're actually 5 points behind Dallas because Dallas won last night. But Dallas also has a game in hand. So Dallas is on 1 3/4 per game. The Timbers are under 1 1/4. That's a huge difference. And where the Timbers are now, 1.23 points per game, as we like to say, that ain't shoot. That's not going to get the job done. And frankly, that's not even really that close to getting the job done. If you're close to that point in September or October, you're dead in the water. And whether that's dead in the water in terms of you miss the playoffs altogether, or dead in the water in terms of you finish 8th or 9th and you squeak into a play-in game only to become, at best, the lamb sacrificed at the altar of LAFC. I mean, you're dead in the water either way.
And don't they have a chance to get up to like 1.4 with a win on Saturday? If am I getting that right?
Thereabouts. It might be a little bit under that now with the draw against RSL last night. But that highlights the point that they need to start racking up these points now, in significant part because it's going to get a lot harder as they move along, because instead of playing the RSLs, who's just not very good, and the Vancouvers, who has put together some results, but that's starting to fade away. They lost again at Dallas last night. And the Minnesotas of the world, who are still struggling and still without, and will still be without, their best player, and Bebelo Reynoso. Even though he has now returned to Minnesota, he will not feature against the Timbers as he gets back into the team and back into shape. You're not going to get opportunities to consistently get points against a stretch as soft as this is. And so, when you do look at those dropped points against Austin in particular is the one that I think will stick in their craw, because it's the game they should have won. They just can't afford to do that, because there are going to be some draws and some losses down the road against the LAFCs and the Seattles and the Dallases of the world.
Yeah, those type of results have already happened. You can no longer afford to really slip in those type of matches, right? Like, you got to get 3 against Minnesota now this weekend. You got to go on the road the following weekend and get 3 at Sporting Kansas City. I don't care what happens. That one even more so than the Minnesota game.
And SKC has been playing better recently.
Which is a little scary for that being a trap game, right? Like,
the home draw against LA Galaxy now, those are just the kind of results that you can't have. Looking back at that one, that's an LA Galaxy team that's at 0.75 points per game right now. You gave them a point at your place. That they've just dropped that margin is gone, because they've already dropped the points that they should have had from games at home against poor teams. And so, if they drop too many more of them, it's, that's the concern. So, that's what I mean when I say that this is the stretch in which they've got to rack up some points. And if they can get that game against Minnesota, if they can get the win against Minnesota, I think you look back at this sort of 4 MLS game stretch, and say, all right, we took 8 points from those 4 games. The Austin one still bothers us a little bit, but that's not bad. That's workable. And then you go to SKC.
11 if you count the St. Louis game.
Yeah, but if you drop points against Minnesota and then drop points at Kansas City, and that's how you close out May, you're probably looking at that saying, we just frittered away the softest part of our schedule that we're going to have all year. Now it gets harder, and we're still just struggling to keep our noses above water.
Yeah, and that's not a position this team wants to be in. This group really does feel like it's one of the more talented lineups and teams in MLS. Players and coaches have continually said that. Now, whether that is the case will be defined by what those talented players end up doing on the field, and how they're able to build out of this relatively positive stretch compared to how the start of the season was for them, how they're able to continue to build points. Shifting gears from points to dollars here, we'll have a brief discussion on the salary breakdown for the Timbers, for all you sickos out there that enjoy a good examination of the roster's salary numbers. Top 5 salaries for the Timbers make sense for the most part, right? Given what we knew from last year and given what the cost was to get one of the big guys. And, Evander's at the top, 1.8 million, Jimmy Chara, 1.5 million, Seba Blanco, whose status is still very much in question, 1.38 million. The opportunity there.
These are base salary
numbers.
Discuss
this. Yeah, these are base salary numbers. The opportunity there potentially to use the season-ending injury designation on him if he, with his chronic knee issues, cannot, continue through the remainder of the season. We'll talk a little more about that, but Niezgoda, obviously the big bugaboo in that top five at 850,000 for Niezgoda, which puts him in the high TAM range. Dario Zuparic, big pay raise for Dario. He structured his contract fat on the end. He went from $375 last year to $735,000 base salary this year. So good for the big Croatian to get himself some dollars, especially now that he just got married. Marriage, weddings, life, it's an expensive thing, and you can bet Dario can afford it now. So that's the top five. The total base salaries is about 12 million, which is spread across 27 players. The total compensation is 14.5 million or so, which in MLS ranks around the middle of the pack at about 16th.
Yeah, almost exactly mid-pack.
Yeah, pretty much exactly mid-pack. So,
which is higher than they were last year. You remember this conversation last year was about how they were near the bottom. So Evander obviously changed that a little bit.
Yeah, Evander is definitely a factor there, but they have increased spending elsewhere. Frank Boley is like $450K allocated to him, and they've given extensions and raises to a few guys, including Zach McGraw, who very clearly deserves it at this point as one of the team's MVPs. Looking at those numbers, both the individuals and the team numbers, and thinking ahead to the summer, Chris, what I guess stands out to you at this point as we look at those budget numbers released by the MLSPA?
Well, a couple caveats. One, in that, in particular, the base salary number is not necessarily the player's salary cap hit. We know that Sebastian Blanco, even though he was, what did you say, about 1.2 in base salary or something like that, is near the max TAM threshold, which is 1.651 million ish this year. And that's because there's some additional stuff that goes into guaranteed comp that counts against the cap. And so we know he is sort of because of the way the Timbers have done their DP designations early this year, we know that Seba is sort of the highest in the closest, I guess I should say, to the max TAM threshold. Transfer fees and for TAM or DP level players, amortized transfer fees spread over multiple years, can also affect the cap. We know that Jaroslav Niezgoda from previous years is near that max TAM threshold as well, even though his base salary is only 800,000. There's some additional guaranteed compensation that goes to him that's baked into that, but there's also part of his transfer fee that's still allocated to his cap hit. So we know that in terms of cap dollars, he's up near that 1.65 million threshold. And I think that, I think that to me is the biggest takeaway. When you look at Felipe Mora, he was only at about 350,000. That obviously is a very significant change from last year when he was up in the TAM range. And that's a result of, as Ned Gravovoy talked about when we talked to him, or sort of late in the winter, a result of them restructuring his contract and extending him. But his annual, sort of cap hit is significantly lower now, whether it's 350 or 450, we don't know. But it's, in that ballpark rather than, comfortably inside the TAM range, as it was last year. And that's all the calculus that the Timbers are having to balance as they figure out over the course of the next 6 weeks or so, and it is 6 weeks or so now, who is going to get the season-ending injury designation. Somebody could be Eric Williamson, could be Sebastian Blanco, could maybe be Felipe Mora. That seems a little less likely. But who's going to get that? And if the Timbers want to be ambitious in the summer transfer window, I think they should. That decision is certainly above my pay grade, especially given that my pay grade is 0. But if they want to be ambitious, they should also use the amnesty provision. In years past, and this is a change this year, in years past, that could only be exercised during the offseason. The Timbers didn't do it, but we found out later that that's at least in part because they can do it at any time in the year now. And so, will that be Yaroslav Nizhgoda? That if they're going to sign a young DP striker, which is the thing that makes the most sense to me, that would make a lot of sense, right? Because you'd be bringing in a guy who would eat up Nizhgoda's minutes. It would be hard to justify playing a lame duck and ineffective Yaroslav Nizhgoda over a young DP who you're trying to get minutes to become a major figure in the club and whom presumably you just spent a good amount of money on. And so you wouldn't do that. So it would make sense to amnesty Nizhgoda. Maybe it makes sense to do Mora if you're not confident that he's ever going to be able to get back on the field, even notwithstanding his cap hit. One thing is because Mora has a multi-year contract now, they could theoretically use their 2024 amnesty provision on Mora and just sort of eat the cap hit for this year, because it seems like that's not all that significant. Or they could with Sebastian Blanco, which would clear him off the cap for the remainder of this season. But they're going to have to make those decisions, and I think the salary numbers that we've seen just put those decisions in pretty stark contrast. And what we see the Timbers do with those designations is going to be really reflective of how ambitious they are going to be in the summer window. And so watch carefully what the Timbers do. They can say that they're going to be ambitious until the cows come home, but actions speak much louder than words. They certainly were not ambitious in the winter transfer window. Maybe they didn't have the ability to, or maybe they just decided not to be, but they weren't. And they say they're going to be more aggressive in the summer window, but let's see it. And now we've got sort of a good amount of the field laid out in front of us that we can see. And we'll be able to see whether the Timbers are true to the word that they're going to be aggressive.
Yeah, and with regard to the Blanco thing, like there is the potential for serious drama there, right? There's a lot of emotions.
Yeah, it's really
in the idea that Sebastian Blanco, one of the greatest players in Timbers history, could be this expendable of an asset in this situation is both a reality of soccer, of sports, of the salary cap scenario in MLS. But it is unique in that, you have a highly competitive guy who, no matter what the outlook is, he's going to, work extremely hard to try and get back on the field. And he's going to be convinced that he is not only ready to contribute, but is going to be able to contribute into the future. If he obviously comes face to face with that scenario where Ned Grabavoy or the front office come to him and say, look, like the best thing for the club right now is for us to move on, that could get dicey, not only because, fans would potentially react to it the way they would. That's not really a calculus for the front office, but the way that Blanco reacts and the potential fallout from that, and trying to balance respecting a club legend and, giving him an opportunity to go out on his terms versus doing what's best for the team, is a really difficult scenario to be in for any sports team. And I do not envy Ned Grabavoy for potentially having to make that choice. Yeah,
we're at the point with Blanco's injury comeback where we are very, very actively asking the question whether that is a light at the end of the tunnel or whether it's a train. And it's going to be one of those two things, and we're going to find out in the next 4 or 6 weeks.
Yeah, he had received an injection in his knee to address some nerve pain earlier this week. He missed the RSL game entirely, did not travel, and they're looking to hopefully get him back for Minnesota, but I don't know if they're necessarily going to be urgent in doing that, especially given how a lot of other players have played lately, and the idea that they are keeping this in their back pocket in all likelihood, right? Like, there is no requirement of the amount of games played that Blanco would reach where he would no longer be eligible for the season-ending injury designation.
He just has to have a season-ending injury.
He has to have a season-ending injury that is, ethically and responsibly, evaluated by the Timbers physicians and outside physicians if they so choose, and it has to be legit. If it's not legit, if they're,
it's pushing, gonna get ugly.
it one way or the other, then it would get ugly. Then
And they shouldn't do that
a player
if it's not legit.
grievance
I mean,
situation.
to be very clear,
of course not. Yeah.
They shouldn't do that if it's not legit. If it's not legit, then they should give Eric Williamson the season-ending injury designation, because that is legit. And if they want to move on from Blanco, then they should use the amnesty provision to do that. Like, there are ways to do it, and there are ways to do it right. And frankly, it would be really disrespectful to Sebastian Blanco to designate him as a season-ending injury, and it would be scandalous to do so in light of everything he's done for the club if he doesn't actually have one. But on the other hand, if the guy's not going to be able to get back on the field this year, then, I mean, at some point, that's just a reality that has to be acknowledged.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of layers to that, and a lot of complication, and there's a lot we don't know right now. But we, as you said, in the coming weeks, we will know more on the Blanco front, on their plans for the summer window once that reopens, and the center back that they were in pursuit of that was close but no cigar, but is still in the cards for them. DP number 9, young DP number 9, is obviously the secondary priority, and possibly another player, according to Ted Grabavoy. So
do they need to add somebody to the central midfield is the obvious question. In light of Williamson and Ayala's injuries, is Noel Caliscan enough depth? Probably Jimmy Chara also comes in, but then you just create another hole. You fill a hole by creating a hole. I think that's another place. I don't think that's a DP level player necessarily, or a TAM level player that they need in that spot, but I think they probably need another guy in that spot.
Definitely. Switching gears to the Thorns, it's been a bit of an uncertain stretch for a team that we repeatedly on this podcast have lauded as this nearly unstoppable force, which, at times over the last couple of years, they have been thoroughly dominant. They have shown themselves to,
and at times this year they've been dominant.
Yeah. They've been the most talented team in NWSL for 2 years. They were dominant at the start of this season, but now, with Becky Sauerbrunn injured, but not because of Becky Sauerbrunn being injured, they are, winless in their last 3 matches. They had 2 3-3 draws, which pretty ugly for a team that prides itself in defense. And then their first loss of the season on the road at Houston, where Rocky Rodriguez, who I think was a great substitute in the midfield for Christine Sinclair, something we both suggested last week.
It's a really concerning injury.
Yeah, she came in and she scored the goal and she was great. And then in like the 60th or 50th minute, she goes down with a knee injury. Her knee buckles, and we find out this week from Mike Norris that it's a sprained MCL. So she's out 6 to 8 weeks, which means that regardless, Thorns fans are not going to see Rocky Rodriguez back on the field likely until whenever Costa Rica is eliminated from the FIFA World Cup, which could be early, is probably expected to be early given their group. But for her sake, obviously, you hope she's back and healthy and ready to contribute fully for Costa Rica, because she is one of their best players, and it's such an important time in any player's life when they get the opportunity on that biggest stage. So
for one, thank goodness
sure.
Thank goodness it wasn't worse. If you have a sprained MCL, that is a little bit of a bullet dodged, because it could have been worse, and so. Thank goodness it wasn't. Thank goodness that the World Cup is still in play for her, and a very, very speedy recovery for Rocky as she gets back from this, so that she can be fit and ready to go for the World Cup and for the Thorns after the World Cup. That's, I think, though, a pretty big injury. They really don't have a like-for-like replacement for Rocky Rodriguez. And we've seen some of the frailties that come from the other players in that position who the Thorns have played in that spot. In terms of the Thorns as a whole, really disappointing performance this last weekend. I think is fair to say. At Houston, look, it was hot, and it was clear as the game went along that fatigue was becoming very much an issue for the Thorns. You had players who were dominant who became much, much less so as the second half dragged on. And so that was a factor. To be clear, it was a factor. I think the performance as a whole, though, is really concerning. And I guess I should say the performance as a whole is concerning. I shouldn't say really concerning because, as you pointed out, that was their first loss of the season in their 7th or 8th game. That's pretty good. That's like, champagne problems. I know a few teams, including a few teams that play in the same city, that would love to be 7 games into the season, losing their first game. So, yeah, but nonetheless, I think it is very fair to point out both the warning signs that we've seen recently, the struggles that they've seen recently, and then that poor result, and to be concerned about that. One of the things that really concerns me about this game and the way they approached it is, especially in conditions like this, where it's going to be a tough game in a hot, humid climate that's going to just take a physical toll. The Thorns did not do a good job of playing the game state. They got their noses in front. They played pretty well, I thought, in that first half. Were by far the better team, got the lead. And then in the second half, they were just, frankly, criminally open still. It was wide open spaces for the Dash to run into. And they weren't, frankly, playing like... They were playing like a team that went up 1-0 and were like, we are just going to run this other team off the field. We're going 2-0, 3-0, 4-0. We're going to crush them. That's just not how, especially road games in difficult conditions, in a deep league where there is legitimate talent, even though the Dash aren't among the best in the league, there's legitimate talent on the other side. That's not how games go. And whereas I think one of the Thorns' strengths, even earlier this year, it's not that long ago that they showed this, but it certainly was the case last year, was their ability that when they got their noses in front in games, they would just seize control. Remember the game at Kansas City where they just utterly dominated the first half, and given it was a Current team that was reeling at the time, but they just ran them off the field. The Current were blessed to be down 2-0 at halftime. And then after halftime, Kansas City really built into the game. They got the goal. They pulled it back to 2-1. But then the Thorns just squeezed the air out of it and shut things down, closed down the spaces that Kansas City was exploiting. And then when Kansas City started overexposing themselves because they were having a harder time attacking into the Thorns, and they had to push numbers to do so, that's when the Thorns killed them on the attack, and Sophia Smith just dunked all over them. Where was that this last week? Where's that been? Where was that against Angel City? And so I hear the discussion about the team. I hear the things that are being said, and I kind of wonder if maybe we also just need to consider the fact that there's a tactical issue here, that the tactical approach to these games and trying to run everybody off the field just isn't working. And that just needs a tweak. I frankly am concerned when I hear talk like I think we heard about from Mike Norris. He didn't use these words, but I think it's a fair characterization to say about a crisis of confidence. And as I hear other people sort of talking more about the vibe within the team, it shouldn't be that bad. This is their first loss of the season.
Yeah, Megan Klingenberg is someone that this week I had a chance to speak with her. Terrific conversation about leadership that that'll be within a feature on her that's going to come out soon on Oregon Live. But one thing really stood out to me among what she said when it comes to this specific stretch for the Thorns. She said, we've come to a point where we're like, okay, it's clear we're not having fun. It's clear we're trying really hard. And the great paradox of both soccer and life is that when you start trying harder and harder, the harder it becomes to achieve what you want to achieve. And she said that she has had to essentially be one of the people to remind this group to have fun, to play with joy, which was the motto of last season and is the reason why, despite the hurricane of off-field distractions for this team, they were able to win a championship and persist and like be an emblem of overcoming adversity. And now they're hit with like a short stretch of on-field adversity, and suddenly things are fraying at the seams in terms of their confidence, in terms of the way they've played. And that is definitely concerning.
Why are these quotes so existential?
Yeah, these are pretty existential things that both she and Mike Norris have said. Like they have very clearly some stuff to work out and figure out in order to get these results. It's not just going to come because they're the most talented team in the NWSL.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, look, we have a familiar pattern where fans react and overreact, and then you typically get from the coach and from the players, a much more measured response. In some ways, this is kind of the opposite. Which, and to be very clear, I don't know anything about what's going on internally. This is just me reading the things that we see publicly, and so I don't mean to say that there is something more going on here, but it causes me some concern that there's something more going on here, because if everything was normal and hunky-dory and they just had this stretch of results, I think what you'd be hearing is, yeah, we gotta tighten a few things up. We gotta, sort out some things tactically, but we've got a lot of belief in this group. We've shown it in the past, and we think we're going to be back there very soon. I mean, why isn't that the quote? I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah,
and it causes
the
me some
vibes
concern.
are weird.
Yeah,
the vibes
really
are very weird. They were real good and real fun at the start of the season, and now things do feel shaky in that way. So it's
not
something
even
to keep an eye on.
It's not even like any of like they didn't take a 6-1 loss to anybody, right? Like they're not getting pumped. They got a solid road draw at North Carolina. They got a little bit disappointing, but not devastating home draw against Angel City. And then they lost a 2-1 game at Houston in a game that they should have gotten more out of. But like, it's also just kind of a hard place to play because it's in Houston. And so like there are very easy, ready explanations for what's going on here, but people don't seem to be reaching for those. They seem to be going in a different direction. And I'm a little bit confused and concerned as to why.
Thorns obviously slipping a bit in the table, not any distance between themselves and the competition, because some of the competition is above them now. The Spirit are the lone remaining undefeated team. They last I checked were at the top of the table. The Thorns were slipping below them, below LA Reign, tied with San Diego. They got to be careful here. NWSL has a lot of parity, and you do not want to put yourself in a position where you're the best team talent-wise. You know that you're the defending champions. You have a great internal culture with your players in terms of how they interact with each other, in terms of how they build each other up and play for each other. All that doesn't matter in the end if you're not delivering those results, right? Like they definitely have a lot to answer for on the field in the coming weeks, and we'll see how that progresses for them. Some breaking news here on the podcast related
terrible
to
medium for breaking news, but go ahead.
Yeah, an absolutely awful one. You will have seen this on the internet before you listen to this podcast. The Timbers are going to induct club legend Diego Valeri into the Ring of Honor on July 15th. Valeri will come back to Providence Park for that match against the Columbus Crew July 15th, and the Timbers are going to add him to the Ring of Honor, which is an awesome moment for a guy that more than deserves it. A club legend in every sense, on and off the field. Chris, what's your reaction to that?
Pretty easy induction.
About as easy as it gets.
Very easy selection. I mean, obviously that is hardly deserved for Valeri, who is a forever club legend. And I look forward and hope that we also have the plans of a statue unveiling at the same time, because he is, he is everything that you want the Portland Timbers to be in every single way. Takes every single box. And that's the kind of person you want to put out in front of your stadium.
No doubt. And July 15th is the date for that. So that'll be a fun day to celebrate Valeri and everything he gave to this club, including its lone MLS Cup in 2015.
going against the very team, and I'm sure this is not an accident, against the very team that they will be playing when they induct him into the Ring of Honor. Returning though, our brief interlude for breaking, but not when you hear this breaking news. Back to the Thorns. Coming up this week, they have the Chicago Red Stars coming to Providence Park, which is a pretty good cure for whatever ails you. The Red Stars have been dire. The Red Stars are the team that should be talking about a crisis of confidence because they have been dire. And so this is an opportunity for, I think, the Thorns to get kind of back in a little bit better vibe. That's the only way to describe it. A little bit better vibe as they go to a much more complicated road game at San Diego the following Friday. So Sunday, I think is what otherwise would be a fairly routine game, I think is actually pretty big for the Thorns. Because they're going to need to bring everything, vibes included, if they want to go down to the Wave to get a result, which, given where they are in the table and the complications of the World Cup and all of that, they probably need these points now. And so I think these next couple weeks are going to be huge and an important opportunity for the Thorns to get back in the right way against the Red Stars.
Absolutely. Big moment in the season for both teams, the Timbers and the Thorns, for very different reasons, very different teams, no doubt. But it's an exciting stretch and one to keep up with closely if you're a fan of PTFC. So more games this weekend. Saturday, Timbers play Minnesota. Sunday, Thorns are at home against Chicago. That's a get-back game if I've ever seen one. Get that one. Thorns go back out on the road for a game at San Diego, which is crucial for the table. Streaming info and times for all of those games obviously available on the websites of those two individual teams. But any closing thoughts, Chris, unrelated to soccer? Anything grinding your gears?
It's not unrelated to soccer, but the branding for the World Cup 2026 is like hilariously bad.
Oh, it's so bad.
They just put the number 26 in a stupid font and then put the World Cup trophy in front of it. It's so bad. I mean, really like strong graphic design is my passion. Vibes coming out of that one. I'm just. It's really funny to think of like all the people who like had to look at that and be like, that's it. And then they've got this just ridiculous hashtag of we are 26 along with it, which is just like, well, I'm not 26. I'm older than that. You might be, yes. you might be, closer to 26. But
I'm 27. So I just missed it.
You just missed it. It's so close. But it's like that whole package. I mean, all the people at USSF who had to sign off on that, all the people at FIFA who had to sign off on it. Sometimes it's just delightful.
The logo for the US's bid for that World Cup was cooler looking than the logo that ended up being the logo for the actual
World Cup.
There's so much you can do. It's continental, right? So you could do something cool with like the shape of the continent. And I just look.
There is a never-ending like well of source material from which to draw inspiration here, and they went with stupid font and trophy, and that's it. Amazing.
Just the level of minimal effort there is something to really behold. Very funny to see FIFA do.
It is very funny, delightful even.
Not terribly surprising. No, when it comes to that organization.
Not surprising at all. This is after all the organization that made Visit Saudi Arabia a presenting sponsor for the Women's World Cup this year, which is that's a good one too. So
a choice,
real choice.
That'll do it for us this week on Soccer Made in Portland. We will have more logos maybe to make fun of next week. And maybe we'll continue this discussion on the 26th one. Maybe the online hate will lead to a revamp in the next week for FIFA's World Cup branding. Who knows? But make sure to follow us on Twitter, Soccer Maiden PDX, at Chris Reifer and at Ryan T. Clark. Keep an eye out for a feature story on OregonLive.com either today or tomorrow on Megan Klingenberg, who has been really a crucial presence in terms of leadership for the Thorns in these last several years since she joined the club. loved her perspective, her ability to put into words what leadership means is something that I think everybody, regardless of whether you're a sports fan, should take a look at. So we will have that. Subscribe to us wherever you get your pods. Leave us a rating if you so choose, and we will see you next week.